This is interlude 1 regarding Danny. It is a type of chapter that is hard to express, and it's better off just reading off the book. So that's what's gonna happen today. The television flicked off and the screen went black, cutting the documentary off mid-sentence. Danny harbored, sighed and sat down on the bed, only to stand just a moment later and resume pacing. It was just 3:15 in the morning, and his daughter Taylor was not in her room. Danny ran his hand through his hair, which was thin enough at the top to be closer to baldness than not. He liked to be the first to arrive at work, watching everyone arrive, having them know he was there for them. So he usually went to bed early. He would turn in at 10 in the evening, give or take, depending on what was on TV. Only tonight, a little past midnight, he'd been disturbed from restless sleep when he had felt rather than heard the shutting of the back door of the house. Just below his bedroom, he had checked on his daughter, and he found out her room was empty. So he waited for his daughter to return for 3 hours. Countless times he has glared out the window, hoping to see Taylor coming in. For the 12th time, he felt the urge to ask his wife for help, for advice, for support. But her side of the bed was empty, and it had been for some time. Daily, it seemed, he was stuck by the urge to call her cell phone. He knew it was stupid. She wouldn't pick up. And if he dwelled on that for too long, he became angry at her, which just made him feel worse. He wondered, even as he knew the answer, why hadn't he got Taylor a cell phone? Danny didn't know what his daughter was doing. What would drive her to go out at night? She wasn't the type. He could tell himself that most fathers felt that way about their daughter, but at the same time he knew Taylor wasn't social. She didn't go to parties, she didn't drink, she wasn't even that interested in champagnes when they celebrated the New Year's together. Two ominous possibilities kept nagging at him, both too believable. The first was that she had gone out for fresh air or even for a run. She wasn't happy, especially at school. He knew, and exercise was her way of working through it. He could see her doing it on a Sunday night, with a fresh week at school looming. He liked that her running made her feel better about herself, that she seems to be doing it in a reasonable, healthy way. He just hated that she had to do it in here, in this neighborhood, because here, a skinny girl in her mid-teens was an easy target for an attack, a mugging or worse. He couldn't even articulate the worst of the possibilities in his own thought without feeling physically sick. If she had gone out at 11 in the evening for a run and hadn't come back by 3 in the morning, then it meant something had happened. He glared out the window again, at that corner of the house where the pool of illumination beneath the streetlight would let him see her approaching. Nothing. The second possibility wasn't much better. He knew she was being bullied. Danny had found out in January that his little girl had been pulled out of school and had taken to the hospital, not the emergency room, but the psychiatric ward. She wouldn't say by whom, but under the influence of drugs they had given her to calm her down. She had admitted that being victimized by bullies, using the parole to give him a clue that it was they and not he or she. She hasn't mentioned it, the incident or the bullying, since. If he pushed, she only tensed up and grew more withdrawn. He had resigned himself to letting her reveal the details in her own time, but months have passed without any hints or clue being offered. There was precious little Danny could do on the subject neither. He had threatened to sue the school after his daughter had been taken to the hospital, and the school board have responded by paying her hospital bill and promising they would look out for her to prevent such events from occurring in the future. It was a feeble promise made by sorry about that.
Chronically.
By a chronically overworked staff, and it didn't do a thing to ease his worry. His offer to have her change school had been stubbornly countered with rules and regulations about maximum travel times a student was allowed to have between home and a given school. The only other school within a reasonable distance of his daughter's place of residence was Arcadia High, and it was already desperately overcrowded with more than 200 students on a list requesting admittance. With all that in mind, his daughter disappeared till the middle of the night. He couldn't shake the idea that the bullies might have lured her out with blackmail's threat or empty promises. He only knew about that one incident, the one that had landed her in the hospital, and it had been grotesque. It had been implemented but never elaborated on. That more had been going on. He could imagine those boys or girls were tormenting his daughter, egging one another as they came up with more creative ways to humiliate her or harm her. His daughter hadn't said much out loud, but whatever had been going on had been mean, persistent, and threatening enough that Emma, his daughter's closest friends for years, have stopped spending time with her. It galled him. Sorry about the pause. Impotent. Danny was helpless where it counted. There was no action he could take. His one call to the police at 2 a.m. had only earned him a tired explanation that the police couldn't act or look for her without something more to go on. If his daughter was still gone after 12 hours, he'd been told he should call them again. All he could do was wait and pray in his heart, in his throat, that the phone wouldn't ring. A police officer or a nurse on the other end ready to tell him what had happened to his daughter. The slightest of vibration in the house marked the escape of the warm air in the house to the cold outside door, and there was a muffled whoosh as the door kitchen shut again. Danny felt a thrill of relief couped with agitated fear. If he went downstairs to find his daughter, would he find her hurting or hurt? Or would his presence make things worse? Her own father seeing her at her most vulnerable after humiliation at the hands of the bullies. She had told him in every way except articulating it out loud that she didn't want that. She had pleaded with him with body language and averted eye contact, unfinished sentences, and things left unsaid. Not to ask, not to push, not to see when it came to bullying. He couldn't say exactly why. Home was an escape from that, he suspected. And if he realized the bullying made it a reality here, maybe she wouldn't have that relief from it. Perhaps it was a shame that his daughter didn't want him to see her like that, didn't want him to be that weak in front of him. He really hoped that wasn't the case. He ran his fingers through his hair once more and sat down on the corner of the bed, elbows on the knee, hands on the head, and stared at his closed bedroom door. His ears were peeled for the slightest clue. The house was old. It hadn't been a high-quality building when it had been new, so the walls were thin, the structure prone to making noise at every opportunity. That was the faintest sound of door closing downstairs. The bathroom? It wouldn't be the basement door, with no reason for her to go down there. He couldn't imagine it being a closet, because after 2 or 3 minutes, the same door opened and closed again. After something banged on the kitchen counter, there was a little but occasional groan of footboards. 5 or 10 minutes after she had come in, there was a rhythmic creak of the stairs as she ascended. Danny thought about clearing his throat to let her know he was awake and available should she knock on his door, but decided against it. He was being cowardly, he thought, as clearing his throat would give him would give reality to his fears. Her door shut carefully, almost inaudiently. With the slightest tap of the door on the doorframe, Danny stood absurdly, opening his door, ready to cross the hall and knock on her door to verify that his daughter was okay. He was stopped by the smell of jam and toast. She made a late-night snack. It filled him with relief. He couldn't imagine his daughter, after being mugged, tormented or humiliated, coming home to have a toast with jam as a snack. His daughter was okay, or at least okay enough to be left alone. He let a shrugging sigh of relief and retreated to his bedroom to sit on his bed. Relief became anger. He was angry at his daughter for making him worried, not even going out of her way to let him know she was okay. He felt a smoldering resentment towards the city for having a neighborhood and people he couldn't trust his daughter to. He hated the bullies that preyed on his daughter. Unlying it all was frustrating with himself. Danny was the one person he could control in all of this, and Danny has failed to do anything that mattered. He hadn't gotten answers, hadn't stopped the bullying, hadn't protected his daughter. Worst of all was the idea that this might have happened before, with him slightly sleeping through it rather than laying awake. He stopped himself from walking into his daughter's room, from shouting at her, demanding answers, even if it was what he wanted more than anything. Where had she been? What has she been doing? Was she hurt? Who were those people that were tormenting her? He knew by confronting her and getting angry at her, he would do more harm than good, would threaten to sever any bond of trust they had forged between them. Danny's father had been a powerful, heavy-set man. Danny hadn't gotten any of those genes. Danny had been a nerd when the term was still young in popular culture. Stick-thin, awkward, short-sighted, glasses, bad fashion scent. What he had inherited was his father's famous temper. It was quick to rise and startling in its intensity. Unlike his father, Danny had only ever hit someone in anger twice, both when he was much younger. That said, just like his father, he could and would go off on tirades that would leave people shaking. Danny had long viewed the moment he started to see himself as a man, an adult, to a point in time where he had sworn to himself that he wouldn't ever lose his temper with his family. He wouldn't pass that on to his child the way his father had to him. He had never broken that oath with his daughter, and knowing that what kept him contained in his room, pacing back and forth, red in the face and wanting to punch something, while he never gotten angry at her, never screamed at her, he knew his daughter had seen him angry. Once, he had been at work, talking to the mayor's aide. The man had told Danny that the revival project for the docks were being cancelled, and that contrary to promises, there were to be layoffs rather than new jobs for the already beleaguered dock workers. Taylor had been spending the morning in his office on the promise that they would go out for the afternoon, and had been in a position to see him fly off the handles in the worst way with the man. 4 years ago, he had lost his temper with Annette being his wife for the first time, breaking his oath to himself. That had been the last time he had seen her. Taylor hadn't been there to see him shouting at her mother, but he was fairly certain she had heard some of it. It shamed him. The third and last time that he had lost his temper, where Talia had been in the position to know had been when she had been hospitalized following the incident in January. He had screamed at the school principal who had deserved it, and Taylor's then biological teacher who probably hadn't. It had been bad enough that the nurse had threatened to call for the police officer, and Danny barely modified mollified, had stomped from the hallway to the hospital room to find his daughter, more or less conscious, wide open in reaction. Danny harbored a deep fear that the reason Taylor hadn't offered any details on the bullying was out of fear that he would, in blind rage, do something about it. It made him feel sick, the notion that he might have contributed something to his daughter's self-imposed isolation and how she was dealing with her problems. It took Danny a long time to calm down, helped by telling himself over and over that Taylor was okay, that she was home, that she was safe. It was something of a blessing that, as the anger faded, he felt drained. He climbed into the left side of his bed, leaving the right side empty out of habit that he had yet to break, and pulled the cover around himself. He would talk to Taylor in the morning, get an answer of some sort. He dreamed of the ocean. And that marks the end of the chapter. What a beautiful way to end it. Thank you for listening.